we spit down on him in our ingratitude. How pathetic.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Raw Media. We hope you're prepared because we have some absolutely cringy SJWs in today's video. We start things off with some SJWs who crashed Ben Shapiro's speech. Shapiro was actually calling out SJWs, and this absolutely triggered the ones that were in attendance. This obviously caused quite a scene.
You get to interrupt lectures if you're the right race, or if you're the right gender, or the right sexual orientation. You get to do these things without punishment because, after all, that's in the nature of social justice, group justice. We don't hold you responsible for your individual actions. You get extra points in heaven because you were born with a certain skin color or sexual orientation.
This SJW got called out by David Horowitz in front of loads of people. David asked her to do a simple task, which was to condemn a terrorist group, and well, she was being very defensive and skating around the whole question. That was enough for Horowitz to come to a conclusion.
I think you understood what I meant by that. I meant if I say something, I'm sure that I will be arrested for reasons of Homeland Security. So if you could please just answer my question.
If you condemn Hamas, Homeland Security will arrest you.
If I support Hamas, because your question forces me to condemn Hamas. If I support Hamas, I look really bad.
If you don't condemn Hamas, obviously you support it. Case closed. I have had this experience.
This next SJW, very early on in her encounter against Michael Knowles, realized that she was in way over her head. She tried posing a question to Knowles, and as always, Knowles was very much prepared and quick to fire everything she threw at her. She very quickly found herself on the back foot and was in for a difficult ride from there onwards.
You also said that the U.S. intervened, that the U.S. funnels money into other countries, right? In aid and things like that.
Right, much more than any other country in the history of the world by a long shot.
Did you also talk about how the U.S. intervenes in countries in other ways, like war, and that the U.S. is tearing up these countries? And
which countries
these are
in particular are you concerned
for? Okay, so.
You mean when the United States invaded Afghanistan to overturn the Taliban?
Do you think?
Well, because you're making statements that are not specific, so I want to get to the heart of your question.
Okay, but let me just, with what I'm giving you right now, try to answer my question.
Lil Weezer explains to those in attendance how they can win a debate about abortion against people that are pro-abortion. She explains things clearly and actually brings up some really good points that debunk a lot of arguments pro-abortion people have, mostly concerning when within the development of the baby it is deemed not acceptable to carry out an abortion.
Here's them, so I was wondering what I could do to get around this and kind of rebuttal them.
Sure, so there's two arguments for that. First is the stage of development. When leftists call a baby a fetus and say that a fetus is not a baby, by definition it's different, that's a stupid argument because a fetus is simply a term that identifies the stage of development. You know, it starts with a zygote and then an embryo and then a fetus and then a baby when it's born, but the terms for stages of development continue after birth. You have a newborn, you have an infant, you have a toddler, you have a child, you have an adolescent, you have an adult.
In this next clip, Ben Shapiro explains to everyone that he really doesn't care what people do when it comes to transgenders and transitioning and the like, but he makes it very clear that there is no way kids should be forced to change their genders as they are so young and they're not capable of consent, and points out how there can be some really long-term effects that are pretty difficult if something like that were to happen.
What's the harm, you know, if somebody's going to be a happier person because they say that they're a man or a woman, like what's the harm in just letting them do it?
I'm not in favor of government banning people who are adults. Children I'm in favor of banning because now you're talking about somebody who's not capable of consent. Right? All of our laws are based on the ability of people to consent. If you're a child, you can't consent. So I'm very much in favor of banning gender transition for kids. I think that it's frankly evil. I think you're making decisions for children who are not capable of making decisions for themselves that are permanent and have long-lasting, significant, and severe impact. As far as adults, if you're 25 and you want to get a sex change surgery and you feel like it's going to make you feel better, you have the right to do it. You do. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I mean, the research on this stuff tends to be somewhat conflicting, but if it works for you, it works, right? It's a free country.
Now we have an SJW who came up front to ask a question and started a discussion again with Michael Knowles. He brought up a point and asked a question, but as soon as he finished speaking, he immediately ran away and didn't want to participate in any debate or discussion. Knowles even tried to call him back and get into it, but this SJW was completely coward and didn't even seem to pay attention to what Knowles had to say.
I personally think that the Columbus murals portray warts in history, obviously, which I think should be portrayed. Would you also support an alternative mural depicting Lakota people scalping settlers?
Scalping the settlers?
Tanyan Maniyo.
Could you describe, well, hold on, I want to speak with you. Okay, he doesn't want to answer. I suppose the question that he should answer is whether there is any comparison between some gratuitously violent display intending to degrade in the year 2019 some, I don't know if the fellow is even listening to the answer to his question. Probably because he doesn't want to learn a thing, does he?
Again, we have Michael Knowles calling out an SJW for disrespecting Columbus. Knowles was passionate about this and explained sternly to the SJW that what Columbus did is the reason that they're able to have things like free speech in general, and one of the biggest reasons that they are where they are today. As you're about to see, this SJW really got on Knowles' bad side.
For us to spit on that man who made all of it possible because he made some moral concessions in order to take the most ambitious voyage at that time in the history of man is so bizarrely ungrateful. It is so ignorant of historical and political realities as to be naive and sophomoric.
My question was, how can you justify calling him a hero? I agree.
I've just justified it. That's my explanation. I think that you're standing on the shoulders of giants and you think that you're flying, but you're not. We are dwarfs standing on the shoulders of that great man, and we spit down on him in our ingratitude. How pathetic.
Next is an SJW who tries to take on Michael Knowles once again in a debate, and she was in for an absolutely miserable time. She made a point, but Knowles asked her to prove and support her claim, but she said she wouldn't do it. Knowles was very bluntly called her out for it and explained that her lack of evidence to back her statement absolutely kills her whole argument.
Where do you expect these immigrants to go when the U.S. intervenes in these countries that don't ask for U.S. intervention?
Which country? Well, yes, the Taliban in Afghanistan didn't ask for U.S.
I'm just
intervention.
leaving it as
well, I
an
guess
open
they did ask
general
for
question.
it when they
I'm
flew
not going to
two planes.
specifically narrow it down to any sort of.
I know you can't
specific-
narrow it down because when you get specific, your point falls apart. In
No.
the general, your point sounds like it makes sense,
Listen
but in
to
the
me.
specific, it doesn't.
Here's Ben Shapiro making a very good point, and it's really one for the leftists to listen to. He makes a number of good points in general, but the main point he gets at is really good, and it makes perfect sense. It's definitely right up there as one of his best phrases. You know, just like facts don't care about your feelings.
This springs from the notion that we are all made in God's image, and God doesn't really care whether we are black, white, or green. He doesn't really care whether I'm Jewish or Christian when it comes to the crucial issue of whether your opinion ought to have weight in a logical conversation. God's a fan of logic, in other words. And I think that we all should be fans of logic if we hope to live in a republic together. There's nothing I despise more than the notion that I am supposed to shut up because your truth trumps the truth. There's no such thing as your truth, there is just the truth. There's your experience, and we should...
We end things off today with another kid who tries to go toe-to-toe with Michael Knowles. SJWs just love going at him. This kid was pretty confident and he really backed himself going against Michael Knowles, but he was going to be absolutely embarrassed and shut down with no struggle. In fact, it was actually the kid that walked straight into his own downfall in the argument. Check this out.
The Earth, but it will change to a certain point the ecology of our planet such that it is much more difficult for humans to survive. That is the consensus. And a lot of climate change deniers, like yourself, like Ben, like Clavin, they perpetuate that this is all a liberal hoax and that science...
No, I'm not saying it's a liberal. I mean, it's obviously being pushed by politicians primarily. That's why at the United Nations, it's not...
politics. Politicians are going to push political issues.
Right, it's politics, not science. That's my point.
If you did like this video, guys, and do want to see more, then please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Goodbye for now, everyone. We'll see you next time.